outside. You can buy your own version. So let me introduce you the one and only Team Walker, please.
It is wonderful to be with you. This is my first time in Romania, and I am so deeply impressed by the beauty of your country. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Alexandra for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. I want to begin by saying that I never wanted to leave my home country. And over the last few years, I've met hundreds of educational visitors in educational tours in Finland. And I got the impression that they see me as some kind of educational pilgrim, that I wanted to flee the perils of American schools and escape to Finnish utopia. But alas, that was just not the case. My wife and I decided to move to Finland for a very simple reason. We were hungry for better work-life balance. And I was very happy as a teacher in the Boston area. I was at a supportive school and I felt that I had good freedom actually as a teacher. But we were having a hard time as a family paying the bills. I was teaching full-time and then I was also working several part-time jobs. And I was pursuing a master's degree in elementary education. And the year before we moved to Helsinki, we had a little baby. And my wife was at home with our infant, and all told, things felt very stressful and overwhelming for us. My wife is a Finn, and so we dreamed of moving to Finland where we would have a slower pace, where we would have more time as a family. And actually, oh no, not this again. Let's try it again. Up and down, okay. Yes, it worked, okay. So we purchased one-way tickets to Helsinki before I even had a job. We were just so desperate to have better work-life balance that I was prepared to hit the pause button on my teaching career just to have more time as a family and to have a slower pace of life. But something miraculous happened 1 month before we moved to Helsinki. I received an email from a principal in Helsinki, and she said that there was an opening at her school. I had contacted several principals months before, earlier in the spring, and told them that I was coming to Finland and that I was a teacher and I would be very interested in teaching in Finland. But I didn't hear from any of them, except for this one principal who emailed me just a few weeks before we moved. And she asked if we could have a conversation. So we talked over Skype, and at the end of that conversation, she offered me the teaching job. And I said yes, of course. I was so excited, but then I had all these different expectations as to what I would find in Finland. I had heard of Finland's amazing reputation in the world of education, and I had all these very high expectations. I thought that I would find the latest and the greatest classroom technologies. I thought that I would find the most innovative teaching methods. I thought that I would find beautiful, gorgeous school facilities all throughout the entire country. But when I started teaching in Finland, and as I visited different schools throughout the country, I found that Finland's unique approach to education wasn't as super as I thought it would be. It was actually, and it still is today, simple. And over the last few years, I've been developing an acronym to help me make sense of Finland's approach to education, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you this morning. The first word is sensible. And there are many sensible things that Finland does when it comes to education, but one of the most sensible things that Finland does is borrow great educational ideas from other countries, tweak them, and then implement them on a national scale. And I was very surprised as an American teacher to find out that Finland is very fond of borrowing the best educational ideas from my home country, the United States. So I got to see this firsthand as a teacher in Finland. So when I was teaching my students, I started with a 5th grade class, but then I also taught them the next year in 6th grade. And my students participated in a very innovative, award-winning program called Me and My City. And actually 60% of Finnish 6th graders participate every year in this program, and it's really, really fascinating. So for one day, Finnish 6th graders go to an empty warehouse where there are cubicles set up, and they're given different jobs. So there's a hairdresser, there's a banker, a museum curator, a mayor, a CEO of a company, a manager of a grocery store, all these different jobs, all these different organizations and businesses, all under the same roof. And so kids for one day are role-playing. They're doing business-to-business transactions with each other. They are even paid salaries. They're given free time. It's really fun for the kids. And more than anything, they get to apply their skills in something of a real-world context. And actually, before this one-day visit, the children are preparing, and they're learning about entrepreneurship and the economy and taxes. And what's interesting to me is that kids normally, I don't think, would be so interested in taxes or the economy. But there's something about preparing for this one-day visit that motivates the children to learn these things. And actually, there's been research that's been done that's shown that this program does a wonderful job at developing students' economic knowledge and also their perceived savings behavior. So it's been very effective in Finland. But what I found out, and this is one thing I want to draw attention to, is that this program was inspired by an American program called BizTown USA. Now, BizTown USA has not taken off, it has not done very well compared to Me and My City. And there are different reasons for that. But the thing that I want to share with you is that Finland does an amazing job of learning from other countries. I know we often think of Finland as being this incredible global education innovator, but Finland is actually very skillful at learning from other education systems around the world. And I think that should be encouraging to us as we're seeking to learn from Finnish education and other systems around the world. Pasi Solberg, who is the author of Finnish Lessons and also the author of a recent book called Finnish at Leadership, draws our attention to several other educational ideas that have come over from my home country. He talks about the theory of multiple intelligences, cooperative learning, and also peer coaching. The next word that I want to draw your attention to is independent. So during my first week of teaching in Finland, I thought that I would start the same way that I always started with my students in America. I would review very important procedures. So one of the things that we would do is we would practice walking in a straight, quiet line throughout the hallways, because that's something that we would do in American schools. But when I told my 5th graders that we were going to review walking in a straight line, they laughed at me, because this was something that they never had to do. This is something that they were not expected to do, because even when they were in 1st grade, they were walking through the school on their own, they were going to class on their own. Not only that, but I found out that most of my students were coming to school on their own. They were walking, they were taking the metro, or taking a bus, or riding a bike, and that really impressed me. About 75% of my 5th graders said that they were commuting to school on their own. And then I noticed at my school, even 1st graders were serving themselves hot lunch in the cafeteria. I also saw that my colleagues were very comfortable with giving their students a lot of freedom in the classroom, and that inspired me to do the same with my students. But it's not just the kids in Finland who are given a lot of freedom, it's also teachers. In Finland, teachers largely determine the curriculum, student assessments, and also professional learning. And research suggests that teacher autonomy is linked to greater job satisfaction and greater teacher retention. But it's not just students and teachers who are given a lot of autonomy. It's also schools and districts. Ultimately, what I found in Finland is a culture of trust, not accountability. I found that there was an emphasis on responsibility. And actually, in the Finnish language, there is no word for accountability. And this respect for teacher professionalism and student agency paves the way for autonomous students, teachers, and schools. The next word is modest. So I met my principal for the first time in her office. School was just about to begin, and I was sitting down with her in her office, and she printed out my teaching schedule, and she slid it across the desk, and my jaw dropped. Because in Finland, I'd only be teaching about 3.5 hours every day. And this was a typical arrangement for elementary school teachers in Finland. In the United States, I spent closer to 5.5 hours teaching my students every day. In fact, the OECD, which is the same organization that administers the PISA, found that there's no correlation between the length of the school day and the amount of student learning. I'll say that again. The OECD found no correlation between the length of the school day and the amount of student learning. That same day, my principal took me on a tour of the school, and she was really keen on showing me our computer labs. Now, I expected to find some pretty incredible classroom technologies at my school. So my school is located in downtown Helsinki. It's located in a wealthy neighborhood, and it has about 500 students. And we went to the first computer lab, and it was filled with old laptops from the early 2000s. And there were several of them that were broken. And I was scratching my head because that was not what I expected to see. She wanted to take me to the next computer lab, and we went there, and I saw something more of the same. This time it was desktop computers, 25 of them, but they also looked like they should be replaced very soon. When I started my teaching career in the United States, I was working at 2 public schools in a poor city in Massachusetts, and they had the most beautiful computer labs. So in each lab, 25 brand new Mac desktop computers. And not only that, but as a computer teacher, I would sometimes clean out the cabinets, and in the cabinets I found old tech equipment that was still in the plastic wrap. It had never been opened before. Tech equipment from the 1990s. And I was very amazed by the wastefulness of it all. And so when I came to Finland and I saw that at least the computers in my school were not so impressive, I started to question this emphasis on technology that I saw so evident in my home country. And I found some interesting research. A few years ago, a study revealed that there's about 1 computer for every 5 students in Finnish schools. 1 computer for every 5 students in Finnish schools. But in the United States, it's closer to 1 to 1. And the OECD found that students who use computers very often at school do much worse on the PISA, even after accounting for social background and student demographics. The OECD found that students who use computers very often at school do much worse on the PISA. Now, things are definitely changing in Finland. The Ministry of Education is now putting millions of euros toward digitalization, but it's clear that classroom technology has not been a part of Finland's recipe for educational success, historically speaking. The next word is playful. I also did something interesting during my first week of teaching in Finland. I decided to get very creative with my students' timetable. I knew that in Finland there were 15-minute breaks throughout the day. So usually a 15-minute break for every 45 minutes of classroom instruction. And I thought this was a little soft. I thought it would be much better for my students to spend a longer period of time in the classroom getting deep in their learning. and I thought I was going to teach the Finns a lesson about how to do things very well. But on the third day of school, we were about 1 hour into a lesson. I was standing at the front of the classroom, and there was a boy in my class, blonde hair, blue eyes, who approached me. He had red dots on his forehead, and he told me that he wasn't used to the schedule, and that he thought he might explode. And it was at that point I experienced a pedagogical crisis. Should I hold on to my conviction that students would fare better with longer periods of instruction? Or should I embrace the way of the Finns and give my students more frequent breaks throughout the day? And I decided, when in Finland, do as the Finns do. So I decided to give my students more breaks throughout the day. And what I found when I implemented the Finnish schedule is that my students were much more happy. When they would return after recess, there was a bounce in their steps. And not only that, but they just seemed much more attentive in class. And I found, because I had seen this firsthand, I found that there was so much research that supports unstructured play throughout the day, that these breaks are actually wonderful and phenomenal at increasing students' attention and ultimately improving their achievement. So I became a believer in the Finnish way of breaks. In the United States, in my home country, elementary school students only get 27 minutes of recess every day on average. But in Finland, that number is 75. 75 minutes. In Finland, I discovered a culture of play that extended beyond the frequent breaks, though. I saw something strange during my first year of teaching in Finland. I would walk through the halls around 12 o'clock, and I'd notice first graders who were packing up for the end of the day. They were putting notebooks into their backpacks, and they were exiting the school. And this was a very strange sight, because back home, this was always the sign of a half day. It was always very special. But in Finland, this was the norm. In Finland, it's normal that first and second graders only have 4 hours of school every day. And with those frequent breaks, they only have 3 hours inside the classroom. That is the norm. And so I was very curious. What are students actually doing in Finland at the first and second grade level? What are they doing in the afternoon? If they're finishing their lesson at 12 or 1 o'clock, are they then doing a lot of homework? Are they going to a special club where there's an emphasis on academic work? What I found was that most of the students in my school were enrolled in something that you can find all throughout Finland. It's called Afternoon Club. It's subsidized by the government, and it costs about €5 every day. And I asked the leaders, I decided to stay after school with first and second graders. I wanted to see what they were up to. I wanted to see if they were doing academic work, because they weren't doing that much academic work in the morning, and I expected maybe they should catch up. But what I found was that the kids were not doing homework. The kids were simply engaged in self-directed learning. Oftentimes they were just inventing games on their own. They were playing outside. They were spending many hours outside playing with their friends and having fun. And when I asked the leaders what their philosophy was, it was very simple. We just believe that kids should be playing. They've already had school, so they should engage in play. And this was very refreshing to me, to hear this appreciation and love for self-directed play. Because honestly, I didn't always believe in the power of play. In the United States, I was a first and second grade teacher, and honestly, I thought that play was something that was a waste of time. But in Finland, that's when things started to change. And my conclusion is that most Finnish kids are engaging in self-directed play for about half of every day until the age of 8 years old. And research tells us that play, self-directed play, has so many benefits. Ultimately, it teaches kids 21st century skills, communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. In the United States, researchers have warned of kindergarten becoming the new first grade. And play, in my home country, is even squeezed from preschool. And unfortunately, it's kids who are in poor US neighborhoods who have the least amount of play. But Finland's approach to early childhood education has been simple for decades. Let the children play. The next word is low stress. For the first 3 weeks of my teaching career in Finland, I avoided the teacher's lounge. At my old school in the United States, we didn't have a teacher's lounge. We also didn't have those frequent breaks throughout the day. So I thought that in Finland, when my students would have these 15-minute breaks, that it would be best for me to stay in my classroom and do prep work, because I wanted to improve the quality of my lessons. And I was a little suspicious about what my colleagues were doing, because I would sometimes walk by the teacher's lounge and I'd hear laughter. Or I would peek in and I'd see my colleagues flipping through magazines, sipping coffee. And it all looked very strange and a little suspicious. And it was 3 weeks after I started teaching in Finland when I was confronted by several of my colleagues. They told me that they were worried about me. They thought that I was going to burn out because I wasn't showing up in the teacher's lounge. And I told them that I had already burned out as a first-year teacher in America, and I had developed some strategies for avoiding it, so you don't have to worry about me. That's what I told them. But I also wanted to take them seriously, because my attitude when I came to Finland was that I should be open to learning from others, even if I don't necessarily agree with them at first. And so I told them I would give it a try. I told them that I would visit the teacher's lounge more often. So I would visit the teacher's lounge, I would try to visit the teacher's lounge once per day. And at first it felt very awkward. I would just sit down and pour myself a cup of coffee, and I would just sit there. And I wasn't used to spending time not being productive or being busy. But eventually I did find that it was valuable. It helped me connect with my colleagues. It also helped me to stay fresh throughout the day. And I ended up valuing this practice of visiting the teacher's lounge on a regular basis. In my home country, 46% of teachers say that they experience a high amount of daily stress. And actually that is the highest amount among all professional categories. That's even more than what American physicians say they experience. And a 2016 research study by Penn State University found that teacher stress causes teacher burnout, lack of engagement, job dissatisfaction, poor performance, and some of the highest turnover rates ever. And there's recent research that suggests that teacher stress may be linked to student stress. And that wouldn't be surprising. And I found that Finland keeps things relatively low stress for teachers and students. And certainly, very little poverty in Finland contributes to low stress, but I think the absence of high-stakes testing plays a major part too. Finland keeps external census-based standardized testing to a minimum. There's only one high-stakes external exam, and that comes at the end of high school. But it's not for the purpose of accountability. It's only meant to determine whether students are able, ready to move on to higher education. Finland also employs a very interesting practice where they administer standardized tests to a small sample of students every year, gauging learning that it includes and extends beyond reading, math, and science. Every year in Finland, only 10% of each age cohort is tested. The next and the final word is equitable. All PISA studies have revealed the same thing about Finnish schools. There's very little variation in student performance throughout the entire country. And my sense is that equitable funding has a lot to do with this. About 2/3 of school funding in Finland derives from districts. The rest is covered by the central government. Some districts in Finland rely completely on funding from the central government. It just depends on the financial needs of the district. The city of Helsinki employs a policy called positive discrimination. Essentially, it means that those schools located in poor neighborhoods that have a higher proportion of non-native Finnish speakers receive extra resources. But there's a different story in my home country, where so much of school funding is determined by property taxes. So these are the 6 words that I think accurately describe Finland's unique approach to education. Sensible, independent, modest, playful, low stress, and equitable. In the early 1900s, there was a British schoolboy who found inspiration in the Finnish epic Kalevala. His name was J.R.R. Tolkien, and his experiences with this Finnish epic, Kalevala, would end up shaping The Lord of the Rings. And there's a poem that appears several times in his fantasy novel, and the first line goes like this: "All that is gold does not glitter." Now, Tolkien was describing the protagonist of The Lord of the Rings, but I also think we can take this sentence, we can take this expression and apply it to our understanding of the Finnish school system. There's a lot of gold in Finnish education, and it may not glitter, but there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of inspiration that us from other countries can derive. 2 years ago, I ran a workshop in which we brought American students, American high school students, and Finnish high school students together, and they were sharing stories and sharing observations from their home systems. And I remember meeting this one American high school student, and she was really upset about multiple choice tests administered by her science teacher. And she had spoken with some Finnish high school students, and she heard that there was very little multiple choice testing. And she was inspired to change her world. And I told her that she should sit down with her science teacher and recommend her idea of making tests more practical in nature. Several months later, I received an email from her, and she said that she had spoken with her teacher, and that now the grading policy had changed. That now the teacher was largely basing the grade on practical tests. So this student, this American high school student, found gold in Finland and brought it back to her home country. She was inspired to change her world. And so my question to you is this: what is your golden takeaway when you consider Finnish education and some of the unique attributes? What inspires you? The most important thing is that you take that inspiration and you convert it to action. And I want to remind you that it doesn't have to glitter to be gold. Thank you so much.
Aș dori să ne spuneți în ce mod se face corelarea școlii, perioadei de școlaritate, cu piața muncii. Da, deci în ce măsură cum se face corelarea curiculei și a activității școlare cu piața muncii?
Sure. So I believe the question is about real-world skills, and are we teaching relevant content to students? Is that the idea? Okay. So as I mentioned before, I think there is certainly an emphasis on real-world skills. One of the major things that is emphasized in Finland is having kids make decisions on their own, giving them more agency. And so this new curriculum that has been implemented in the last couple of years emphasizes that students will be able to become very autonomous in the way that they are figuring things out. And I referred to me and my city as, I think, a good example of what it looks like to emphasize real-world skills. I think it depends, of course, on the teacher and the classroom they're looking at.
Do you have to do a lot of paperwork? Here in Romania, we have to do a lot of paperwork, a lot of documents, and I was curious, how are the things in Finland?
I haven't found there to be too much paperwork. I have heard that in Romania there is a lot of paperwork for teachers. Teachers in Finland are spending a lot of time communicating with each other, and then also they're communicating with parents. And so we use this online platform called Wilma, and it's a messaging platform. And so I think much of the time goes into spending on Wilma, and you can do administrative tasks on this online platform. So honestly, there's not too much paperwork. Yeah.
Thank you. Have you assessed the impact of your book in the United States?
Well, I think I'll talk a little bit about this later. But one of the major reasons why I wanted to write this book, Teach Like Finland, is to encourage American teachers, because many of them feel that they're not trusted, they feel stressed out, they love what they do, they love the kids, they're passionate, but they don't feel empowered. And so I wanted to write a book that would be encouraging to them. And I've understood that there are many teachers here in Romania who don't feel trusted and who feel that they're being bossed around. And that's not good. And so I wanted to take my experiences in Finland that have inspired me and take them to people in my home country. So I've received feedback that American teachers are encouraged that some of the things that the Finns are doing really well are also things that are happening in American schools. But I think the biggest takeaway for American teachers has been this emphasis on joy. Because joy is not a word that we usually say much about in the United States. We talk about rigor, hard work, student achievement, being college ready, but we don't talk so much about joy. And so I think it's this emphasis on joy that has been a great encouragement to people in the United States. Sure. After coming to teach in Finland? Yeah. Well, before coming coming to Finland, I was always very passionate about teaching. And I think more than anything, I had a deep sense of this is where I want to go as a teacher. So there's this practice called project-based learning. There's also differentiated instruction. And so I thought, in my mind, these are the practices that I want to develop over time. But when I came to Finland, I experienced these little crises, and I talked a little bit about that. So there was the student who came to me saying that he was frustrated that he wasn't having enough breaks. Then there were the colleagues that came to me and said that they were worried that I wasn't spending enough time with them. And so I think my journey has been that I've become much more open. So before coming to Finland, I thought, this is how I want to get better. These are the practices I'm going to devote my teaching career to developing. But in Finland, because of these crises that I've experienced, I've just become much more open to learning different things from others. So I've been very grateful for that. So I think for me, my journey is still continuing, and I'm still learning so much every day. Yeah. Sure, learning habits, so like professional learning. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't care so much about in the United States was spending time with my colleagues, just talking about education with them. And in the United States, teachers often do things on their own, and I brought that same habit to Finland, where I was spending so much time in my classroom. But in Finland, teachers are often exchanging best practices together. And so I think one of the things that I now prioritize is just sitting down, probably over coffee, and just talking about the things that I find challenging as a teacher and learning from my colleagues. Because in the United States, I don't know if I have this superhero mindset or a messiah complex, but I thought that it was me that had to figure things out. And in Finland, that has been broken, where I now believe that if we want to move forward, we have to come together as teachers. We need to exchange best practices with each other. So I'm so grateful for this event, because this is exactly at the heart of what's happening in Finland.
Hello. Thank you very much for sharing with us all of this. I wanted to ask, because I'm very interested in, other than using that online platform, how do you involve parents in the process? And if you could talk more about the upper years, high school, for example.
Upper years.
Yes, thank you.
I'll start by talking a little bit about high school. One of the very interesting things is, well, my wife is Finnish, and so she's also taught me a little bit about what it's like to be a high school student in Finland. And in the United States, we have this concept called helicopter parenting. Do you have anything like this in Romania? Okay. Because in Finland, I have not encountered helicopter parenting. Actually, the only helicopter parents that I've met in Finland have been from other countries. And so my wife told me that Finnish high school is a lot like American college, where parents are, of course, willing to offer support when it's needed, but it's up to the child to take responsibility of their work and to really take it upon themselves to succeed academically. And so it's a lot like college at the high school level. So in regards to our parents involved, I think it varies, but in my understanding, it's really up to the parents' trust that the kids are going to figure it out. It's their life, it's their academic career, and they need to take responsibility. And yes, there is this online platform, and that is a great way of communicating with parents. It's very efficient. One of the things that you also see these sit-down conferences. So at least once each year, you would have the teacher meet with parents. But one of the practices that I would see often, this is something that I tried to do, was if I felt that it was important to have a conversation with a parent, we would first send each other a message, and then we would arrange a visit. So something very simple and modest in that way. But there's something very powerful. I need to learn more about whether you have a platform like Wilma in Romania. But this platform is not something that I've actually heard much about as I've been reading different articles in literature about Finnish education over the years. I haven't heard too many people talk about this online platform, but this online platform is implemented throughout Finland, and it does an amazing job of ensuring clear communication between parents and teachers. So I think it's crucial, it's foundational. Another thing though, it's also very important to have this kind of platform because in Finland, parents generally are not leading their children to school, even when their children are 7 years old. Children are expected to get to school on their own. So if parents are not communicating with their teachers in some way, they won't really know exactly what's happening at school. Yeah.
Hi. First, congratulations on your book. It's really wonderful. And the question is, how do you tackle aggressive behavior in children? And how do you involve parents? What is their responsibility? Do you get special support in this?
Certainly you can get special support. So a lot of the decision making is located inside the school. And we have this beautiful practice that I talk about in Teach Like Finland called the student welfare team, where you have in a school a group of professionals from different disciplines. So you'll have the psychologist, the school social worker, the nurse, the principal, the classroom teacher, the special education teacher, perhaps additional teachers, maybe even parents, but they come together and then they collectively problem solve. And they are thinking about how they can address a problem in the classroom. And this was a very refreshing practice to me because remember, in the United States I was used to doing things on my own, that I had to be the one to figure out a problem. But then in Finland, I saw a model like the student welfare team where on a weekly basis, there's the student welfare team that's meeting, and what they're doing is they, of course, have arranged meetings with teachers, but then they're also leaving the door open. So if you would like to have a conversation with the student welfare team, you just need to contact your principal and let them know that there's an issue you'd like to discuss confidentially with them. And then that will be the topic of discussion. And then it's also a proactive process where it's not coming together and just complaining about how bad things are. But you're really thinking about what solutions can be implemented. And this is one of the things I want to speak to. As teachers, we are so capable, we are so competent, and we don't need policymakers or anyone else to tell us that we are competent. We know that ourselves. And so what's really important to recognize is that so many of the answers to our problems rest inside us. But one of the ways that we need to get these solutions out is by meeting together. It's very difficult to extract the solutions on your own. So again, really grateful for this festival.
Last question, I promise. I hope so. Will you please share with us how do you assess your personal learning needs as teacher? Not necessarily yourself, but teachers in general, how they do assess their learning needs?
Their own learning needs, yeah.
Yes.
Because I've heard that there are many school inspections in Romania, and the OECD published a report on teachers, and it found that, as far as I can tell, Finland leads the world in school inspections. That's not good. So in Finland, we have a very different system in which we don't have these school inspections, and this is probably going to sound very strange as an evaluation. But in Finland, and this is something that you see in Helsinki, every year the principal will meet privately with the teacher and they'll talk about how things have gone. They'll reflect on their growth, they'll reflect on their students' needs, but it's meant to be a very thoughtful process. And it's meant to be led by the teacher. So it's not the principal saying, I went to your classroom and I saw this and I saw that and I've heard this and these are the things that you must do differently. The process is meant to draw out of the teacher those things that the teacher can work on. And so there are these professional standards in Helsinki that teachers need to consider, but it is up to the teacher and the principal to decide on next steps together. So it looks like, if you can picture it now, it looks like a teacher and a principal sitting down in the principal's office. They're considering these professional standards, learning standards, and it's the principal who's giving the teacher an opportunity to reflect on their growth. That's what it looks like. Sure. Where are you? Oh, there you go. Okay.
I'm happy that behavior was mentioned. Yeah. I'm happy to hear that behavior was mentioned and children's needs. So I'm now thinking of SEN children and what schools do about them.
You're talking about special needs students? Yes. Well, the first priority is to have the students, all students be integrated in the same classroom. And then there are 3 tiers of support in Finland. So there's general support. So that's what we normally do as teachers. We differentiate. We do different things for students. For example, if a child is struggling in learning how to read, then we might meet with that student individually, and that would be general support. But then there's also a higher level support, which is called intensive support. And at that level, that's when you may have the special education teacher working with that student. The highest level is special support. And so at that level, that's when additional funds are allocated, and that's when, if it would be helpful, that child could be in a smaller group environment. That could be inside the same school, or it might be in a different facility. But the hope, the primary hope, is that the children, the special needs students, will be integrated and that they'll be able to learn with others. Actually, in Finland, grouping by ability is outlawed. It's not allowed.
And I've been looking for this moment to happen for a whole year. Guess what's next? An autograph. Yeah, so now you have about, 20 minutes to purchase your own copy of the book. And we are going to be sitting there. And team, do you have enough energy for... Yeah. Okay, so we are going to queue, like in Finland, yeah, for some autographs. So thank you very much.